By late November 1950, American forces in North Korea faced a rapidly changing situation. Chinese forces had entered the war in substantial numbers, moving south through mountain passes and engaging United Nations troops across a widening front. The strategic situation remained unclear, but tactical realities on the ground became immediate. Units found themselves ordered to establish defensive positions along ridgelines and valleys to slow the Chinese advance, while higher commands assessed the broader picture. For many units, this meant digging in and wading through the night in positions they had occupied only hours before. One such position sat along a low ridgeline overlooking a frozen stream valley in the central sector. The company assigned to hold it numbered approximately 140 men, reduced from full strength through earlier engagements and the steady attrition of cold weather injuries. They had moved into position during the late afternoon, establishing a perimeter that stretched approximately 400 meters along the ridge. The ground was frozen solid, making entrenchment difficult. Soldiers used pickaxes and entrenching tools to break through the surface, creating shallow fighting positions that offered limited protection from wind and incoming fire. The temperature had dropped steadily throughout the day. By the time darkness fell around 1700 hours, it measured approximately 15 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Wind coming down from higher elevations made the effective temperature even lower. Soldiers wore whatever cold weather gear had been issued, but supplies remained inconsistent. Some men had proper parkas and insulated boots. Others wore standard uniforms with additional layers improvised from whatever materials they could find. Frostbite had already affected portions of the unit during previous days, and the company aid station had sent several men to the rear with frozen extremities, the order to hold. The position came through battalion headquarters during the afternoon. No specific duration was given beyond holding until further notice. The company commander understood this meant at least through the night and likely into the following day. Intelligence reports suggested Chinese forces were moving through the area in unknown strength. The ridgeline position blocked a valley approach that could threaten the battalion's flank if left undefended. Holding the position would require enduring whatever came rather than maneuvering or withdrawing. As darkness settled, the company organized its defensive perimeter. 3 platoons occupied positions along the ridge, each responsible for a sector. A small reserve remained near the company command post, positioned in a depression that offered some shelter from wind. Machine gun crews set up fields of fire covering likely approaches. Mortar crews prepared their weapons, but faced the challenge of frozen ground that made it difficult to establish stable base plates. Ammunition was distributed, though soldiers had learned to keep rifle magazines inside their clothing to prevent the rounds from freezing. Visibility dropped to near zero once full darkness arrived. The moon would not rise for several hours, and cloud cover blocked starlight. Soldiers could see only a few meters in front of their positions. This darkness made observation difficult, but also concealed the position from observation by enemy forces. The company relied on listening posts positioned forward of the main line to provide warning of any approaching movement. These posts consisted of 2 or 3 men positioned in shallow depressions, armed with rifles and a radio for communication back to the platoon command posts. The cold became the primary concern during the early hours of darkness. Men rotated between fighting positions and slightly more sheltered areas behind the line, though shelter remained relative. Small fires were prohibited because they would reveal positions. Body heat dissipated quickly in the wind. Soldiers stamped their feet and moved their hands to maintain circulation, but prolonged exposure made frostbite inevitable for some. The company aid man moved along the line checking for cold weather injuries, but his ability to treat them remained limited under field conditions. Weapons required constant attention in the extreme cold. The M1 Garand rifles that equipped most of the company functioned reliably in cold weather if kept clean, but accumulated ice could jam the action. Machine guns faced greater challenges. The Browning automatic rifles and .30 caliber machine guns needed their mechanisms kept clear of ice. Crews learned to cycle the actions periodically and keep ammunition belts free of snow and ice. Grenades remained functional, but the cold made the safety pins difficult to remove with numb fingers. Communication became more difficult as the night progressed. The radio connecting the company to battalion headquarters functioned intermittently. Batteries lost power in extreme cold, forcing radio operators to keep spare batteries inside their clothing to maintain warmth. Wire communication to the platoons remained more reliable, though establishing the wire had required significant effort through frozen ground. Runners provided backup communication, moving between positions along paths marked during daylight hours. Around 2100 hours, a listening post reported movement in the valley below the ridge. The sounds suggested a substantial number of people moving, though darkness prevented visual confirmation. The report went back to the company commander, who alerted the battalion. Artillery support was requested to cover likely assembly areas, but the fire mission took time to coordinate. Meanwhile, soldiers along the perimeter strained to hear any additional sounds that might indicate an approaching attack. The movement continued for approximately 30 minutes before stopping. The listening post heard voices speaking Chinese and the sounds of equipment being positioned. The company commander faced a decision about whether to call in artillery on suspected positions or wait to confirm enemy locations more precisely. Ammunition for the supporting artillery battalion was limited, and wasting it on empty ground would leave the position without fire support if a serious attack developed. He chose to wait. The cold intensified as midnight approached. Men who had been in position for hours struggled with exhaustion and numbness. The company commander ordered rotation of personnel between forward positions and the slight shelter available behind the ridgeline, but the rotation provided only brief relief. Some soldiers showed signs of hypothermia, becoming confused or lethargic. These men were pulled back to the command post area where the aid man attempted to warm them, though options remained limited. Shortly after midnight, rifle fire erupted from one of the platoon positions. Chinese troops had approached to within 50 meters before being detected. The engagement lasted approximately 10 minutes. American soldiers fired at muzzle flashes and shadowy shapes barely visible in the darkness. The Chinese probe withdrew after encountering resistance, leaving uncertainty about casualties on either side. The brief firefight revealed that enemy forces had moved closer to the American position than previous estimates suggested. Following the contact, tension increased along the entire perimeter. Every sound drew attention. Soldiers peered into darkness, seeing nothing but imagining movement. The company commander requested illumination rounds from the artillery battalion. The first rounds arrived 20 minutes after the request, briefly lighting the valley and revealing open ground with no visible movement. The illumination lasted only seconds before darkness returned, but it provided temporary reassurance that no immediate assault was developing. The hours between midnight and dawn moved slowly. Cold and fatigue affected every soldier on the line. Some men fell asleep despite the temperature, their bodies shutting down from exhaustion. Squad leaders and platoon sergeants moved along positions, keeping men awake, knowing that sleeping in such cold could prove fatal. The company aid man treated several cases of frostbite, wrapping affected extremities and sending the most serious cases to the rear when opportunity permitted. Around 0300 hours, mortar rounds began falling on the American position. The fire was inaccurate, with most rounds impacting behind the ridgeline or overshooting into the valley beyond. The mortar fire suggested Chinese forces were probing defenses and attempting to identify positions. American mortar crews prepared to return fire but held pending orders from the company commander, who wanted to preserve ammunition for more critical situations. A second probe came around 0400 hours against a different section of the perimeter. Chinese troops advanced closer this time, reaching positions within 30 meters before American defenders opened fire. The engagement was brief and confused. Darkness prevented accurate assessment of enemy strength or casualties. After approximately 15 minutes, the Chinese forces withdrew again. 2 American soldiers were wounded by rifle fire during the exchange, both with non-life-threatening injuries that the aid man treated in position. The pattern of probes and withdrawals suggested that Chinese forces were testing the American position rather than launching a sustained assault. The company commander reported this assessment to battalion headquarters. The response indicated that similar probing actions were occurring along other portions of the line. The overall Chinese intent remained unclear, but the immediate requirement remained unchanged. The company would hold its position through the night. As 0500 hours approached, the coldest part of the night, soldiers had been in position for over 12 hours. Fatigue and cold had reduced effectiveness substantially. Some weapons had frozen despite efforts to keep them functional. Ammunition that had been kept warm enough to fire during earlier hours now showed signs of freezing. The machine gun crews worked constantly to keep their weapons operational, cycling actions and clearing ice from mechanisms. Dawn came slowly, with first light appearing around 0600 hours. Visibility gradually improved, allowing observation of the ground in front of the position. The valley appeared empty. Snow that had fallen lightly during the night showed no recent tracks near the American perimeter. Chinese forces had withdrawn during darkness, leaving no visible indication of their strength or positions. With improving light, the company conducted a careful assessment of its situation. The position had held through the night. Casualties included 2 wounded and 7 men suffering from frostbite severe enough to require evacuation. Ammunition expenditure had been modest, leaving adequate supplies for continued defense. Weapons that had frozen during the night required maintenance before they would function reliably again. Around 0700 hours, orders arrived from battalion headquarters. The company would be relieved by a fresh unit moving up from reserve positions. The relief would occur during morning hours, after which the company would withdraw to a rear area for rest and refit. Until the relief arrived, the company would maintain its defensive position. The relief force reached the ridgeline around 0900 hours. The process of handing over positions took approximately 1 hour as the fresh troops moved into the fighting positions and familiarized themselves with fields of fire and defensive arrangements. The company that had held through the night began withdrawing in stages, moving back toward the valley where vehicles waited to transport them to the rear area. The night had accomplished its limited objective. The position had been held, denying Chinese forces access to the valley approach for one critical period. The cost included casualties from combat and cold, along with the physical toll of exposure on every man in the unit. There had been no dramatic victory, no decisive engagement. The night represented instead a test of endurance under conditions that reduced combat to its most basic element, the ability to remain in position despite every incentive to seek shelter or withdraw. In the broader context of the Korean War's winter campaign, it was one of thousands of similar nights where units held positions because orders required it, waiting through darkness and cold for dawn to arrive. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe.